speak 9 languages, Your Honor. I can help. You speak 9 languages? Yes, sir. Yes, Your Honor. You mop my floors. You empty my trash. And you want me to believe that? Look at you. You're a janitor. Know your place. The mop closet is down the hall. Caldwell stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. One short, brutal sound that echoed off the marble walls. But here's what nobody in that courtroom knew yet. Within the next 40 minutes, this woman in a custodial uniform was going to bring a federal judge to absolute silence. Let me take you back to how this moment began. 6 hours earlier, 5:15 in the morning, the city was still dark. Brianna Summers sat in the back of a half-empty bus, one earbud in, listening to a Mandarin lesson. Her custodial uniform was already on, her name badge clipped to her chest. In her lap, a composition notebook held together with duct tape. The pages were filled with vocabulary in 9 different scripts. She studied it every morning, every break, every bus ride, for years. Nobody ever asked what she was reading. She arrived at the Caldwell Federal Courthouse before sunrise. Same routine for 6 years. Keys jangling in an empty corridor. The cold brass of the courtroom door handles under her fingers. The echo of her footsteps on marble she had polished 1,000 times. She straightened the flag in courtroom 3. She wiped down the judge's bench. She cleaned the podium. By 7:30, lawyers and clerks filled the hallways. Brianna became invisible again, just another uniform pushing a cart. That morning, a major federal trial was underway. 12 immigrant farm workers were suing a corporate agricultural company for labor exploitation. The key witness was a woman named Elena Vasquez. She spoke only Spanish and Mixtec, a rare indigenous language from southern Mexico. Then the crisis hit. The certified court interpreter collapsed at home. A medical emergency. She would not be coming. Courtney Williams, the court reporter, made call after call from the clerk's office. No backup Mixtec interpreter within 200 miles. Not one. Judge Caldwell faced an impossible choice. Delay the trial for weeks, risking Elena's visa status, or proceed without proper interpretation, risking a mistrial. Brianna heard the panic through the open door while emptying a trash can. She stood there, gripping the edge of her cart, heart pounding. She knew what she could do. She had always known. She stepped into the doorway. Courtney was still on the phone, voice tight with stress. "Excuse me," Brianna said quietly. "I speak Mixtec, and Spanish, and 7 other languages, if that helps." Courtney slowly put the phone down. "You... what?" 5 words, barely above a whisper, and every single thing that happened next, the laughter, the testing, the silence, started right here. Courtney didn't believe her. Of course she didn't. But desperation has a way of making people listen. She picked up the phone and called Judge Caldwell's chambers. 2 minutes later, a clerk appeared at the door. "The judge wants to see her. In the courtroom. Now." Not in chambers, not in private. In the courtroom. In front of everyone. Brianna's stomach dropped. She looked down at her uniform. The rubber gloves are still tucked in her pocket. The smell of cleaning solution on her hands. She pulled the gloves out and set them on her cart. Then she walked toward courtroom 3. The hallway had never felt so long. She pushed open the heavy oak door. The courtroom was half full. Lawyers at both tables. Clerks. Journalists covering the exploitation case. Elena Vasquez's family sitting in the second row, holding each other's hands. And at the defense table, Richard Holloway. The man who had stepped over her mop bucket 100 times without once looking at her face. Judge Caldwell sat high on the bench, black robe, silver hair, 30 years of authority carved into every line on his face. Every eye in the room turned to the woman in the custodial uniform. This was the moment you heard at the beginning, the moment she said she could help, the moment the judge told her to know her place, the moment he laughed. But the story didn't end with his laughter. It started with it. Because Ted Brennan, the court administrator, stepped forward and laid out the math. No Mixtec interpreter available. A continuance of at least 3 weeks. Elena Vasquez's temporary visa could expire before the new date. Two plaintiffs left in legal limbo. Caldwell's smile faded. He didn't like being cornered, but the numbers left him no choice. He looked at Brianna, really looked at her this time. Not in the uniform, at her. "Fine," he said. "Step forward, let's see what you can do. But I want it on the record. This is an emergency accommodation, nothing more." Brianna walked toward the interpreter station. Every step echoed. Her sneakers on the marble floor she had mopped that very morning. She could feel Holloway's eyes on her. She could hear someone in the gallery whisper, "Is that the cleaning lady?" She sat down. Her hands were trembling. She put them flat on the table to stop it. Caldwell didn't ease into it. He wanted to expose her. He wanted this over with. He read a complex legal passage in English. Miranda rights, procedural protections, dense, technical language designed to trip up even trained professionals. "Translate that into Spanish," he said. "Now." Brianna closed her eyes for half a second. Then she spoke, fluent, precise. Every legal term is rendered perfectly, not a single hesitation. The murmuring started immediately. Caldwell blinked. He turned to the bilingual court clerk. "Say something to her in French." The clerk spoke a sentence in rapid French. Brianna translated it into English before the clerk had finished. Then, unprompted, she rendered it into Portuguese. The murmuring got louder. Caldwell sat up straighter. He pulled a document from his desk, a passage in German. He read it aloud. He had studied German in college. He knew enough to test her. Brianna responded in German, not textbook German, Frankfurt dialect German, precise, natural. Then she translated it into English without being asked. The courtroom was no longer murmuring. It was silent. Holloway had stopped smiling. His associate had put down his pen. The journalists were writing furiously. Caldwell stared at her. The condescension was gone. The amusement was gone. What remained on his face was something he had not felt in years on that bench. Shock. He took off his reading glasses, set them down slowly. "Where did you learn all of this?" Brianna's voice was quiet, steady, the voice of someone who had waited a lifetime to be asked that question. "Everywhere I could, Your Honor. The library, the bus, my neighbors." Silence. Long, heavy, absolute silence, the kind that changes the air in a room. Then Judge Caldwell said 6 words that no one in that courtroom expected. "Get this woman a chair." He paused. "At the interpreter station, now." But here's what Brianna didn't know yet. Sitting in that chair was about to put her directly across from Richard Holloway, and Holloway had already picked up his phone under the table. Men like Holloway don't lose quietly, and he had no intention of starting now. To understand what happened next, you need to understand where Brianna Summers came from, and where she came from was nowhere. Foster care at 6 years old. No parents, no family, no one who stayed. She moved 4 times before she turned 10. Different homes, different schools, different faces that never became familiar before she was packed up again. But there was one constant, one person, Mrs. Dorothea Graham. She lived next door to Brianna's second foster home, an elderly Haitian woman with silver hair and slow hands and a voice like warm water. Every evening she sat on her front porch and told stories, not in English, in Haitian Creole, in French, sometimes both, woven together like thread. Brianna would sit on the bottom step and listen, not because she understood at first, because it was the only time anyone talked to her like she mattered. Week after week, month after month, the words began to stick. Then the grammar, then the feeling behind the sentences. By the time she was 9, Brianna could hold a full conversation in Creole. By 11, she was reading French picture books from the library. Mrs. Graham noticed. One afternoon, she handed Brianna a composition notebook, black and white marble cover. She pressed it into the girl's hands and said something Brianna would carry for the rest of her life. "Write everything down, child. Words don't leave you like people do." Brianna filled that notebook in 3 months. Then she started another, and another. She learned Spanish from a Dominican foster sister who braided her hair and whispered bedtime stories. Mandarin from a restaurant owner who let her wash dishes in exchange for meals. German from a public radio program she listened to every night for 3 years, Portuguese from a church group, Arabic from a college student who tutored kids at the shelter, Italian from opera recordings at the public library, and Mixtec from farm workers at a community aid center where she volunteered as a teenager. 9 languages, no tutor, no classroom, no degree. Just a girl who figured out early that if the world wasn't going to talk to her, she would learn to talk to the world. Mrs. Graham passed away when Brianna was 16. She never saw what her notebook started. But Brianna still carried it, every single day. Brianna sat at the interpreter station in courtroom 3, the same room she had cleaned every night for 6 years. She knew the grain of the oak witness stand because she had polished it 1,000 times. She knew the clock on the back wall because she had changed its batteries twice. She knew the podium because she had wiped fingerprints off it every single evening. But she had never sat in front of it. The room felt different from this side, bigger, louder, the air heavier with expectation. At the defense table, Richard Holloway glanced at her. He recognized her. She could see it in his face, the slight tilt of his head, the slow smile that spread across his mouth. He leaned toward his associate and whispered something. The associate looked at Brianna and smirked. She heard it anyway. Not the words, the tone. She had heard that tone her entire life. The prosecutor called Elena Vasquez to the stand. Elena walked forward like a woman walking into a storm. Small frame, calloused hands, eyes darting between the judge, the lawyers, the gallery full of strangers. She sat in the witness chair and gripped the armrests like they were the only things keeping her from falling. The prosecutor began in English. A simple question. Name, country of origin, how long she had lived in the United States. Brianna translated into Spanish. Clear, calm, professional. Elena answered in Spanish, short, shaky sentences, her voice barely above a whisper. Then the prosecutor asked about the working conditions, the hours, the pay. What happened when someone complained? And Elena broke. Not in tears, in language. The fear overwhelmed her and she slipped out of Spanish the way a drowning person slips out of reach. She began speaking in Mixtec, fast, desperate, the words tumbling out in a language almost no one in that building had ever heard before. The prosecutor stopped mid-sentence. He looked at the judge. The judge looked at Brianna. The courtroom held its breath. Brianna leaned forward, slowly, gently. She looked directly at Elena, and she spoke to her in Mixtec. Not formal Mixtec, not textbook phrases, warm, unhurried, natural Mixtec, the kind you speak to someone you want to feel safe. Elena froze. Her eyes went wide, her grip on the armrests loosened, her shoulders dropped 2 inches. For the first time since she had walked into this courthouse, maybe for the first time in 3 years in this country, someone understood her. Not just her words, her. Elena whispered back in Mixtec, a long, steady breath of language, the story she had been trying to tell. Brianna turned to the court. She translated every word into flawless English, every detail, every emotion, nothing lost. The silence that followed was not the silence of doubt. It was the silence of people realizing they had just witnessed something they could not explain. Holloway stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. This woman has no certification. We have no way to verify what she's actually saying. For all we know, she's making it up." The gallery stirred. Elena looked at Brianna with fear in her eyes again. Judge Caldwell paused. He was still processing what he had just seen. The woman he had mocked 20 minutes ago had just done something his entire court system could not. "Your objection is noted, Mr. Holloway. The court will proceed under emergency accommodation. The interpreter's accuracy will be reviewed." Not a ringing endorsement, not yet. Caldwell was still catching up with his own pride, but he didn't stop her, and Holloway sat back down with a look that said this was far from over. Because it wasn't. What Holloway was planning next would make this morning look like a warm-up. The recess bell hadn't finished ringing before Holloway was on his feet. He didn't go to the restroom. He didn't check his phone. He walked straight to Ted Brennan's office and shut the door behind him. "This is a multi-million-dollar case, Brennan, and you've got a cleaning lady translating sworn testimony. Do you understand how that looks?" Do you understand what that does to my client on appeal? Brennan tried to explain the situation. No available interpreter. Emergency protocol. The judge approved it. Holloway cut him off. I don't care what the judge approved. I care about what a jury sees. And what they see is a woman who was mopping the hallway an hour ago now sitting in the interpreter's chair like she belongs there. She doesn't. Fix it. He left the door open on his way out. He wanted people to hear, and they did. Within an hour, the Whisper Network had spread through every floor of the courthouse. The janitor who says she speaks 9 languages. Some people were impressed. Most were skeptical. A veteran interpreter from courtroom 6 shook her head in the break room. If any random person can just walk in and interpret for a federal trial, what was the point of my certification? What was the point of my degree? This sets a dangerous precedent. She wasn't wrong to ask, but she wasn't asking about Brianna's ability. She was asking about Brianna's right to have ability, and that's a very different question. In the hallway outside the clerk's office, 2 paralegals talked in low voices. I heard she didn't even finish high school. 9 languages, though? Come on, maybe 2, maybe 3 if you're generous. 9 is a lie. Even if it's true, she's a janitor. There's a reason she's a janitor. Brianna heard every word. She was refilling her water bottle 10 feet away. Her back was turned. Her face showed nothing. But her hand gripped the notebook in her pocket so hard her knuckles went pale. Even Caldwell wasn't fully in her corner. Not yet. In his chambers that afternoon, he pulled case law on interpreter qualifications, emergency exceptions, appellate risks. He wasn't protecting Brianna. He was protecting himself, protecting the trial. If her translations turned out to be inaccurate, it would be his name on the reversal. He picked up the phone and called the State Interpreter Registry one more time. Still no one available for Mixtec. He hung up and stared at the wall for a long time. Brianna didn't know any of this. She only knew what she felt, and what she felt was the same thing she had felt her entire life. The invisible weight of people deciding who you are before you ever open your mouth. She found the custodial break room empty at 4:30. A windowless room with a humming refrigerator and a microwave with a broken handle. She sat on the plastic chair and pressed her palms against her eyes. That's where Amara Okafor found her. Amara ran the custodial team. She had known Brianna for 6 years. She was the only person in the building who knew what Brianna could do. "Bree, look at me." Brianna looked up. Her eyes were dry, but barely. "You're not proving yourself to them, you hear me? You're proving it for every little girl who ever got told to stay in her lane. That's who this is for." Brianna opened the notebook. Inside the front cover, in faded ink, 5 words written by a woman who had been dead for 15 years. For Brianna, write everything. D. Graham. She closed it, took a breath, stood up. But Holloway wasn't done, and what he was bringing to court tomorrow morning was designed to do one thing: break her in front of everyone. The next morning, Holloway walked into courtroom 3 with a smile that made the air feel colder. He had a new witness, a man named Gerald Whitfield, corporate liaison for the agricultural company, the man who had managed the labor contracts overseas, and he would be testifying entirely in German. This was not an accident. This was a trap. Holloway had spent the previous evening preparing this move. A German-speaking witness, rapid, technical corporate language, financial terms, contractual jargon, the kind of German they teach in business schools in Frankfurt, not the kind you pick up from a radio program. He wanted to bury Brianna in complexity. He wanted her to stumble, to pause, to hesitate just once, because one hesitation was all he needed to file a motion and throw every translation she had ever done into question. He glanced at Brianna as Whitfield took the stand. She was sitting in the interpreter's chair. Same custodial uniform, same sneakers, same notebook on the table beside her. Holloway almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Whitfield began. His German was fast, dense, loaded with sub-clauses and technical phrasing that would make a native speaker slow down. He described the contract structure, the payment schedules, the extension clauses. He spoke for nearly 4 minutes without stopping. The prosecutor looked nervous. The judge leaned forward. Brianna listened. She didn't write anything down. She didn't ask him to repeat a single word. When Whitfield finished, she turned to the court and translated the entire passage into English. Every clause, every number, every technical term, rendered with precision that made the court reporter's fingers freeze over her keyboard. But she wasn't done. "Your Honor," Brianna said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. For the record, the witness stated in English that the workers voluntarily extended their contracts. However, the original German phrasing he used was conditional. It implies the extensions were not voluntary. They were contingent on conditions the workers had no power to refuse. She paused. The German says one thing. His English summary says another. They do not match. The courtroom went still. The prosecutor's eyes widened. He looked at his notes, then at Brianna, then at the judge. Holloway was on his feet before she finished. "Objection! The interpreter is offering legal analysis, not translation. That is far beyond her role." Judge Caldwell didn't respond immediately. He was looking at Brianna with an expression that had changed since yesterday. The mockery was gone. The doubt was fading. What was replacing it was something closer to attention. Real attention. The kind he usually reserved for expert witnesses with decades of credentials. "The interpreter's note is a linguistic observation," Caldwell said slowly. "It is admissible for the record. The jury will determine its weight. Proceed." Holloway sat down. His jaw was tight. His associate wouldn't look at him. In one sentence, the janitor had done what a team of $800 an hour lawyers had not. She had heard what was hidden inside the words. Not just the meaning, the intent. The gap between what was said and what was true. And she had said it out loud, in a federal courtroom, on the record. The journalists in the gallery were writing so fast their pens were shaking. The prosecutor leaned back in his chair and let out a breath he had been holding for 2 days. Elena Vasquez, sitting in the second row, didn't understand the German, but she understood the silence that followed. Something had shifted. But Holloway was staring at Brianna with a look that had moved past annoyance, past frustration, into something colder. And whatever he was planning next, it wasn't about winning a legal argument anymore. It was personal. The courtroom emptied slowly that afternoon. Lawyers packed their briefcases. Clerks gathered their files. The journalists left in clusters, already typing on their phones. Brianna stood up from the interpreter's chair and reached for her custodial card in the hallway. The day was over. Her other job was not. "Ms. Summers." She turned. Judge Caldwell was standing at the side door of the courtroom. His robe was draped over his arm, not on his shoulders, not on his back, over his arm, like he had taken it off on purpose. "Would you stay for a moment?" The courtroom was empty now, just the two of them. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the faint smell of old wood and paper. Caldwell didn't sit at the bench. He walked down the 3 steps and sat in the gallery, front row. The same row where families sit, where plaintiffs sit, where ordinary people sit. He was putting himself at her level, and Brianna noticed. A long silence, the kind that fills a room the way water fills a glass. Slowly, completely. "How long have you worked in this building?" "6 years, Your Honor." 6 years. He repeated it like he was tasting something bitter. "And in 6 years, nobody knew what you could do?" Brianna looked at him, straight at him, not with anger, not with resentment, with something much harder to carry. Nobody asked. 2 words, and Judge Henry Caldwell, a man who had spoken millions of words from that bench over 3 decades, had nothing to say. He sat with it. The silence stretched. She let him have it. She didn't fill it with comfort. She didn't make it easier. She just let the truth sit in the room like a third person. Because Brianna Summers had spent her whole life making other people comfortable, and in this moment, she decided to stop. Caldwell finally spoke. His voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "I owe you something, Ms. Summers. Not an apology, something better." He told her he was going to make a phone call to Dr. Lillian Foster, a linguistics professor at the State University. He was requesting a formal proficiency evaluation, full academic assessment, all 9 languages. "You deserve to be recognized properly," he said. "Not as a favor, as a correction of something that should have happened a long time ago." Brianna didn't cry. She didn't smile. She held the edge of the gallery bench with both hands and nodded once. This was the moment Judge Caldwell stopped being the man who laughed at her. Not because he said sorry, he never said that word, but because he did something harder than apologizing. He changed. And that is a kind of justice that doesn't come from a verdict. It comes from a man willing to admit to himself, in an empty room with no audience, that he was wrong. Brianna picked up her cart and walked toward the hallway. But recognition, she was about to learn, doesn't come without a cost. And the cost was already waiting for her at the end of the corridor. It was almost 8 o'clock. The courthouse was nearly empty. The hallways are dark except for the emergency lights that cast long, pale shadows on the marble floor. Brianna was back in her custodial uniform, mop in hand, bucket at her side. The interpreter's chair was behind her now. The gallery, the judge, the languages, all of it behind her. She was mopping the lobby. Same floor, same woman on her knees. She heard footsteps, soft ones, uncertain. Elena Vasquez was standing at the end of the corridor. She was alone, no lawyer, no family, just a small woman in a second-hand coat, holding her hands together in front of her chest like she was trying to keep something from falling out. She had been waiting. Brianna set the mop against the wall. Elena walked toward her, slowly, each step careful like the floor might not hold. They stood face to face, under the pale emergency lights. Two women the system was not designed to see. Elena spoke in Mixtec, quietly, almost a whisper. She told Brianna that she had been in this country for 3 years. 3 years of paperwork and waiting rooms and courtrooms where people talked about her life in a language she could not follow. 3 years of nodding when she didn't understand, smiling when she wanted to scream. And then today. Today someone spoke to her, not at her, not about her, to her, in the language her mother used, the language of her village, the language she dreamed in. Elena reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a small bracelet, woven threads, red and gold and black, traditional Mixtec craft, handmade, the kind of thing that takes hours to finish and a lifetime to mean something. She took Brianna's hand, gently, and tied the bracelet around her wrist. "For the woman who listens," she said in Mixtec. Brianna looked at the bracelet. She touched the threads with her fingertip, red and gold and black against her dark skin. She didn't sob. She didn't collapse. She didn't make a sound. A few tears rolled down her face and fell on the freshly mopped floor. That was all. But sometimes that is everything. She had spent her entire life learning the words of others, filling notebooks, memorizing grammar, practicing pronunciation on empty buses and in quiet hallways. All of it so she could understand the world. And tonight, standing in a dark lobby in a custodial uniform, a woman she had met 12 hours ago gave her the one thing no language could teach, the feeling of being found. But this was only the quiet before what came next. And what came next would test Brianna in ways she never expected. 2 days later, Dr. Lillian Foster sat across from Brianna in a testing room at the State University. White walls, fluorescent lights, a microphone on the table, recording equipment in the corner. Dr. Foster had been a professor of applied linguistics for 35 years. She had evaluated diplomats, military interpreters, United Nations translators. She had seen talent in every shape and size, but she had never seen anything like this. Over the course of 4 hours, she tested Brianna in all 9 languages. Legal documents, medical terminology, literary passages, conversational phrases, idiomatic expressions, regional dialects. Brianna sat in a plastic chair in her custodial uniform. She had come straight from her morning shift. There was still a faint smell of floor cleaner on her hands. She didn't miss a single passage. When it was over, Dr. Foster turned off the recording equipment. She sat quietly for a moment. Then she removed her glasses and set them on the table. In 35 years of applied linguistics, I have never encountered a self-taught polyglot of this caliber. Her Mixtec alone would be a publishable case study. She paused. This woman doesn't need a certification. The certification needs her. The written evaluation was 12 pages long. Dr. Foster signed it personally and sent it directly to Judge Caldwell's chambers. But it arrived one day too late, because that same morning, Richard Holloway had already filed his motion. He wanted every single translation Brianna had provided struck from the record. Every word, every sentence, every exchange with Elena Vasquez, all of it erased, as if she had never spoken at all. His grounds were simple: no certification, no degree, no formal training, potential bias, possible coaching by the prosecution. He wasn't just trying to win the case anymore, he was trying to make Brianna disappear. Again. The hearing was scheduled for that afternoon, and by the time the courtroom doors opened, the gallery was packed. Word had spread through every floor of the courthouse. Clerks, lawyers, custodial staff, journalists, people who had heard the whispers and wanted to see for themselves. Holloway stood before the bench in a charcoal suit that cost more than Brianna made in 2 months. He spoke with the confidence of a man who had never once doubted his right to be in any room he entered. Your Honor, the integrity of this trial depends on verified, certified interpretation. What we have instead is an unqualified individual, a member of the custodial staff, who has been allowed to provide interpretation in a case involving millions of dollars and the lives of 12 plaintiffs. He turned and looked directly at Brianna. Miss Summers, where did you attend university? I didn't. You have no degree in linguistics? No. No certification from any recognized interpreter's body? No. No formal training of any kind? No. Holloway let the silence hang. He wanted the courtroom to feel the weight of each no. He wanted it to pile up, to bury her. So you have no degree, no certification, no training, and yet you expect this court to stake a multi-million-dollar verdict on your word? Brianna looked at him. Her hands were still. Her voice was level. I expect this court to rely on the truth, sir, which is what I translated, word for word. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Holloway didn't flinch. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a printed document. Then let's test that, right now, in front of everyone. He read a passage in German, complex, technical, full of legal terminology and subordinate clauses. The kind of passage designed to break a non-native speaker at the seams. The courtroom was dead silent, every eye on Brianna. She listened. She didn't ask him to repeat it. She didn't look at her notebook. When he finished, she translated the entire passage into English, fluently, perfectly, without a single pause. Then she stopped and said something that no one in that courtroom will ever forget. And for the record, Mr. Holloway, the passage you just read contains a grammatical error in the third clause. The subjunctive form should be the past conditional. It's not. Whoever wrote your prepared text is not a native German speaker. Dead silence. Then a gasp from the gallery. Then another. Then a sound that Holloway had never heard directed at him in a courtroom before. Laughter. Not at Brianna, at him. His associate dropped his pen. A journalist in the second row covered her mouth. Even the bailiff looked down to hide his expression. She had not just passed his test, she had graded it, and he had failed. Holloway's face went white. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Judge Caldwell watched the whole thing from the bench. He did not smile, but his eyes were different now. There was something in them that hadn't been there 3 days ago, something that looked like respect. He picked up Dr. Foster's evaluation, which had arrived on his desk 30 minutes before the hearing. 12 pages. He held it up. The court has received a formal proficiency assessment from Dr. Lillian Foster, Professor of Applied Linguistics, confirming Ms. Summers' fluency in 9 languages at a professional level. He set the document down. This court finds that Ms. Summers' interpretations have been accurate, professional, and indispensable to these proceedings. Mr. Holloway's motion is denied. He paused, looked at Holloway. And, Counselor, I would suggest you vet your own documents as carefully as she does. The gallery erupted. Applause. Real applause, the kind that starts in one pair of hands and spreads until the whole room is shaking with it. The bailiff let it go for 5 full seconds before calling for order. Brianna's hands trembled. She looked down at her wrist, the woven bracelet, red and gold and black. She touched it with her fingertip, and she steadied herself. She didn't stand, she didn't bow, she didn't say a word. She didn't have to, because every person in that courtroom already knew. The woman in the custodial uniform had just done something that credentials, degrees, and 30 years on a bench could not. She had told the truth, and the truth had won. But this story isn't over, because what Judge Caldwell did next went far beyond a ruling, and it happened in the very room where Brianna had once been invisible. The jury came back on a Thursday, guilty on all counts. The Agricultural Corporation was held liable for systematic labor exploitation. 12 plaintiffs, 12 lives, full damages awarded. Elena Vasquez sat in the second row and wept. Not quiet tears, the kind that come from a place so deep they don't make a sound at first. Just shaking, just holding her own face in her hands. Brianna was sitting at the interpreter's station. She leaned toward Elena and translated the verdict into Mixtec, softly, word by word, the way you explain something important to someone who has waited a very long time to hear it. Elena reached for Brianna's hand, the one with the bracelet. She held it with both of hers and didn't let go for a long time. Justice is a word people use often in courtrooms, but that afternoon, for the first time in that building, it actually meant something. 1 week later, Brianna received a phone call from Ted Brennan's office. Judge Caldwell had requested her presence in courtroom 3, Friday morning, 10 o'clock. Professional attire. She didn't own professional attire. Amara took her shopping on Thursday evening. A simple navy blue blazer, dark pants, flat shoes, nothing expensive. But when Brianna looked in the mirror, she didn't see a janitor. She saw the woman she had always been, the woman no one had bothered to see. Friday morning, courtroom 3. Brianna pushed open the heavy oak door and stopped. The room was full, not half full like during the trial, full. Every seat taken. Courthouse staff, attorneys from multiple cases, clerks who had whispered about her in the hallway, the veteran interpreter from courtroom 6 who had questioned her credentials, Ted Brennan in a pressed suit, Courtney Williams in the second row, smiling so wide her face looked like it might break. Amara's entire custodial team was in the front row. They had requested the morning off, every single one of them. Dr. Lillian Foster sat near the aisle, a folder in her lap. Elena Vasquez and her family were in the third row. Elena was wearing the nicest dress she owned. And at the bench, in full robes, Judge Henry Caldwell. He called the room to order. Then he did something unusual. He spoke without notes. 3 weeks ago, an emergency occurred in this courtroom. We needed an interpreter and the system failed, but a person did not. He looked at Brianna. Miss Summers, would you approach the bench? Brianna stood. Her legs felt unsteady. She walked forward, the same walk she had made 3 weeks ago in a custodial uniform with sneakers squeaking on the marble. But today, the shoes were quiet, and the room was not laughing. It was listening. Caldwell read from a formal document, an official court commendation for extraordinary service to the federal court system. Then he announced a full scholarship, Bridgewater Community College, Interpretation and Translation Certification Program, fully funded through the courthouse's Community Partnership Initiative. Then he said something that made the room go still. Effective immediately, this courthouse is creating a new position, Multilingual Community Liaison. The first person to hold this position will be Brianna Summers. A murmur rolled through the gallery. Amara pressed her hand to her mouth. Courtney wiped her eyes. Elena squeezed her daughter's arm. Caldwell looked at Brianna. Ms. Summers, would you like to say a few words? She stood at the podium, the same podium she had dusted and polished and wiped clean for 2,190 days. She put her hands on the wood. She felt the grain under her palms. Every scratch, every groove. She knew this surface better than anyone in the room. The bracelet on her wrist caught the light, red and gold and black. In her pocket, the notebook. She looked out at the room, at the faces, at the people who had doubted her, at the people who had believed in her, at Elena, at Amara, at the judge who had laughed at her and then fought for her. She said 5 words. "Thank you for seeing me." The room was silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then Amara stood up. Then Elena. Then Courtney. Then the whole front row. Then the row behind it. Then the entire courtroom was on its feet. Brianna didn't move. She just stood there, hands on the wood, eyes open, present. After the ceremony, Caldwell found her in the hallway. "Ms. Summers, I've been on this bench 31 years. I'd like to think I'm a fair man." He paused, the pause of a man choosing his next words carefully. "But today you taught me that fairness isn't just about what you decide. It's about what you're willing to see." He extended his hand. She shook it. Firm, steady, equal. Holloway did not attend the ceremony. But 2 days later, Brianna was walking through the East Corridor when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Holloway was standing there. No briefcase, no associate, just a man in a hallway. He didn't apologize. He said 6 words. "I underestimated you. That's on me." Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing off the same marble floor she had mopped 1,000 times. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't justice. But it was the truth. And sometimes, that's where change begins. Within a week, the story spread. Dr. Foster invited Brianna to guest lecture at the university. A local news station ran a 3-minute segment. The headline went viral. "Courthouse janitor speaks 9 languages, saves federal trial." Other courthouses began reviewing their staffing practices. A National Interpreters Association contacted Brianna about consulting. Amara watched the news segment on her phone in the custodial break room, tears running down her face. She turned to the woman next to her. "That's my girl." 3 weeks after the ceremony, a French diplomat named Jean-Pierre Moreau visited the courthouse for a cultural exchange event. He struggled to communicate with the front desk staff. Brianna, now wearing her new ID badge, multilingual community liaison, stepped forward and addressed him in fluent French. Moreau smiled, impressed. "Madam, your French is magnificent. Where did you study?" Brianna smiled back, a real smile, the kind that comes from a place much older than the moment. "On a porch, with a very wise woman." Mrs. Dorothea Graham never saw what her notebook started. She never saw the languages, the courtroom, the standing ovation, the new badge. But she was there, in every word, on every page, in every language Brianna had ever learned. And she was there now, in this answer, in this smile, in this moment where a girl who came from nowhere finally arrived somewhere. Brianna Summers completed her certification in interpretation and translation 6 months later. Highest honors. The professors said she didn't need the program. The program needed her. But she finished it anyway, because she wanted the paper. Not for herself, for every person who had ever told her she wasn't qualified. She framed it and hung it on the wall of her new office, right next to the court commendation, right next to a photograph of Mrs. Dorothea Graham sitting on her porch in a blue house dress, smiling at someone just outside the frame. A girl, sitting on the bottom step, listening. Brianna works full-time now as the courthouse's multilingual community liaison. She is the first person to ever hold the position. She translates for witnesses. She assists families navigating the legal system. She bridges the gap between people who have something to say and a system that was never built to hear them. On weekends, she runs a free language program for kids in foster care. She meets them at the public library, the same library where she once taught herself Italian from opera recordings. The kids sit in a circle, and she hands each one a composition notebook. Black and white marble cover, just like the one Mrs. Graham gave her. She is on notebook number 15 now. The first page reads the same thing it has read for 20 years. For Brianna, write everything. D. Graham. Some things don't leave you, even when everything else does. Now let me tell you why this story matters. Not just for Brianna, for all of us. Over 25 million people in the United States have limited English proficiency. 25 million. In courtrooms, hospitals, and schools across this country, the gap between language and justice is not a small crack. It is a canyon, and people fall into it every single day. Fewer than 2% of certified court interpreters in America can work in indigenous languages like Mixtec. 2%. That means for millions of people, the legal system doesn't just fail them, it doesn't even hear them. Brianna Summers heard them, not because she had a degree, not because someone trained her, because she listened, because she chose, every single day of her life, to learn one more word, one more phrase, one more language. Not for money, not for recognition, for connection. And that is the part of this story I want you to carry with you. Because there is Brianna in your office right now. There is a Brianna in your courthouse, in your hospital waiting room, in your school, pushing a cart, wearing a uniform, carrying a talent so big it could change the room, if anyone in that room would just stop long enough to notice. We walk past these people every day. We step over their mop buckets. We look at their name badges and decide we already know everything we need to know. We don't. We never did. So here is what I am asking you to do. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. Notice someone. The person who cleans your office, the woman at the front desk, the man who drives your bus. Stop for 10 seconds and ask them one question. What do you know that I don't? You might be stunned by the answer. You might be changed by it. You might discover that the most extraordinary person in the building was there the whole time, and all they needed was for someone to ask. If this story moved you, imagine what a program could do. A language mentorship for foster youth, an interpreter training scholarship for people without degrees, a policy that says talent matters more than paperwork. These things don't build themselves. They start with people who decide that being invisible is not the same as unimportant. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been laughed at by someone who didn't know what you carried inside, leave a comment. Tell me your story. I promise you, someone out there needs to hear it today. Share this with a person who needs to be reminded of what they're worth. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Because stories like Brianna's are everywhere, and they deserve to be told. One last thing. Remember the judge who laughed at her? The man who told her to know her place? He now introduces her at every courthouse event the same way. This is Brianna Summers. She is the most remarkable person in this building, and I almost missed her. The most powerful language in the world is the one that finally says, I see you.
The judge who told her to know her place now introduces her at every courthouse event as the most remarkable person in this building. So what changed? Here's what Brianna's story taught me. First, she learned 9 languages with no school, no tutor, no money, just the library card, a bus seat, and notebook from an old Haitian woman who wrote 5 words inside. Words don't leave you like people do. That's not education, that's survival. That's a foster kid deciding, if the world will not talk to me, I will learn to talk to the world. Second, Holloway tried to destroy her with a German passage in Open Cart. She translated it perfectly, then corrected his grammar. The man with $800 an hour lawyers got graded by the woman who mopped his floor. Talent doesn't care about your title. And third, Elena tied a handmade bracelet on Brianna's wrist. 3 years in this country, and Brianna was the first person who spoke to Elena in her mother's language. That's the real lesson. Seeing someone isn't hard. We just stop it trying. So let me ask you, who's the Brianna in your building right now? The one pushing the cart, wearing the uniform, ununiform, carrying something extraordinary that nobody bothered to notice. Have you ever asked them what they know that you don't? Tell me in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated because of your title? Share this, like, and subscribe. And remember, the most powerful language in the world is the one that